Welcome to The View, where recruitment, marketing and society comes together.
Hi, I'm Neil Armstrong and welcome to The View. Today I'm speaking with Estelle McCartney from Artic Shores. We're going to be talking about AI and how it's generating a huge era of change for recruiters who are being swamped by what's called the sea of sameness. So if you're interested in skills-based recruitment, scrapping the CV, hiring for potential, listen on for more. This is The View, where recruitment, people and purpose come together. Artic Shores have been running a campaign called Scrap the CV, which really caught my attention. So it seemed like the perfect reason to chat with Estelle. Estelle, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Neil.
So scrap the CV. Why?
Well, Neil, I mean, the CV really deserves to be on the scrap heap of every TA team and every company. And there's a number of reasons for that. The first one is that lots of candidates, and let's face it, we might all know of somebody that's done this, and you might have read about our own Chancellor perhaps being a little bit liberal with what she'd put on her CV. And so CVs aren't renowned for being a brilliant source of truth in the first instance. The second problem with them is that past experience has been shown to be a really poor predictor of future performance. And the CV, of course, is backward looking, not forward looking. It doesn't tell you anything about a candidate's potential, about how they might behave in a situation, how they might approach a certain situation. And so it's really limiting in terms of the insight that it might give to a company. But if the CV has been a poor tool and a comfort blanket for many years, the emergence of ChatGPT and candidate adoption of ChatGPT over the last 18 months has made it increasingly redundant and actually a source of pain and trouble for TA teams rather than a helpful tool to help them sift in or sift out candidates.
So you say it's a source of pain. What's the pain? Well, I mean, I'm sure anybody working in recruitment will go, I know what the pain is. What's your take on it?
Well, not just my take, but the take of just about every TA leader that I've spoken to, kind of over the last 6 months, I would say. I think it's taken a little while for that pain to be felt. But what's happening is that candidates, understandably, are using AI, ChatGPT, or other tools to give them a helping hand, not just to write their CVs, but across the entire job application process. And so the impact for that for TA leaders is that they are suffering from what's been described as a sea of sameness.
Okay.
And it's a sea because the volume of CVs that TA teams are receiving has just gone through the roof. I heard of one company who'd seen a tenfold increase in early careers since last year. And I guess there's two things that's happening there. First of all, it's much easier for candidates to pull together a CV using ChatGPT or similar. But actually there are particular AI tools that are free or really cheap to use that advertise themselves as being able to apply for jobs on your behalf while you sleep.
You get that wave of application spam. That's the sea of sameness, right? There's waves and waves.
That's the C bit. And the sameness bit is that because everybody's using AI or similar tools, what candidates are submitting all looks very similar. So not only has the volume gone up, but there's just this sameness to every single application. So how do teams start to make decisions about who they might choose to progress?
And I mean, that sounds like a real challenge, and you know, it's completely understandable, isn't it, of why you would use AI, because clearly you want to present yourself in the best as a candidate. A CV might not be the easiest thing to pull together, and if there's a tool like promising to help you write a better, more effective CV, why wouldn't you use that?
Absolutely, and we spoke to about 2,000 candidates with the survey early autumn, and
this was sorry to interrupt you. This was in your quick advert how students use generative AI in the application process. Really good piece of research. Definitely recommend you go and download that from the Arctic Shores website.
Excellent. And what's clear is, first of all, that adoption and proficiency in the use of AI tools is rising rapidly. So we discovered, or we saw from that survey, that about 88% of candidates were using it. But not just that, but at the same level actually consider themselves proficient. So it's not just that they're kind of dabbling in it, that they're really proficient in it. And also, that they are using AI in job applications, and they don't see it as cheating, and they don't intend to cheat. They just don't want to kind of miss out, and their view is, well, everybody's using it, so I don't want to be the only candidate that's not using it. And then also, I think, interestingly, for companies, there's a sense of, well, presumably I'm going to have to use AI when I'm working, so why wouldn't the company want me to use it
Absolutely
in their job application?
Absolutely. We had our TribePad customer forum a few weeks ago, and I heard two sort of quite interesting perspectives on this. One was a fairly large public sector organization. They had specifically asked candidates not to use AI in the application process. They'd put some wording above a question, and then they'd run some AI detection afterwards. And so it was something like they thought 70% of answered had used some sort of generative AI, despite explicitly saying, please don't.
Yeah.
And their view is, this is a bad thing. We then had somebody else in the room, and he was a recruiter, and he basically said, well, I wouldn't have got my job if I hadn't used generative AI, because I kept applying to jobs and I wasn't getting through, and I'm dyslexic, and I knew I was writing a bad CV. I put together a good CV. It got me through, it got me in front of the person, and then I was able to sell myself, and now I've got this job and I'm doing a great job. And you sort of go, right, this, like, pitching it as almost like a battle of AI versus AI feels like a really negative outcome.
That is not going to help anybody. I mean, I think in the research that we did, we also picked up that candidates viewed companies that were taking that sort of ban it or, deter candidates from using it. Well, they're not a very progressive organisation. They're not very modern, and with it, it's kind of, we'll look back on it and say, well, we wouldn't have banned a calculator or using Excel.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect, from the kind of the employer brand pace. But you do have this challenge then of, you've got lots of TA teams using AI, quite rightly and understandably. Lots of teams are being asked to do more with less. There are a flurry of tools and amazing AI-enabled tools that can be used to improve efficiency, make the experience better for candidates, and to save time when we're all being asked to do more with less. And so it seems really regressive to kind of do the outright ban piece. And the way that we kind of think about it is, you basically got three choices. You can either deter it, to ban it or discourage candidates. But I think the story you've just told, Neil, demonstrates that that's not really a sustainable route.
Yeah.
You can try to detect it, and there are tools on the market that claim that they can detect it. But I think the evidence is mounting that actually they're not that efficient.
Yeah.
And you've got that risk of a false positive, and the ramifications of that. And actually, it's I don't know if you saw, there was an interesting piece of research by University of Reading, a couple of professors who'd managed to convince the university that they would be allowed to kind of infiltrate the final exams of the psychology course. And they had about 20 fake AI candidates who completed the exam, submitted their essays, their exam papers, to the examiners, and not only were they not detected, but actually the scores from the fake AI candidates, actually they all passed and got very nice 2-1s.
Yeah.
And I think that just highlights that this kind of trying to detect it is not, the kind of the AI is moving faster than the detection tools.
Yeah, you get false
Yeah.
positives, false negatives, and then if you do detect it, and you put a little asterisk next to the candidate's application, this candidate may have used AI. Well, if that's going to show up 70% of the time anyway, and is that good or is that bad? Surely we want to bring people into the workplace from Gen Z, Gen Alpha, who are savvy with these tools, who can help us make our businesses more efficient.
Definitely. And I think the other thing is that, again, in the research that we've conducted, we've seen that individuals from lower socioeconomic groups and some minority groups actually are using ChatGPT and AI even more frequently than other groups. And actually, there's a bit of like, well, that's fantastic. They've now got access to that helpful parent or helpful teacher or whatever that they might not previously have had. So something that actually might help to level the playing field. If you kind of take that out, then you're potentially having a negative impact on on diversity.
Yeah, I mean, it's never just black and white on this, is it? I've heard people say. I was chatting with Emma Freivogel from Radical Recruit recently, and her concern was with people, what she calls radical talent, and people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and people who've experienced homelessness and poverty and that sort of stuff may not have access to laptops and therefore are sort of locked out of this AI tool usage. But then on the other half, I have heard other people, not just yourself, say, well, actually this could sort of democratize knowledge and help people from those backgrounds get a foot up by upgrading their CVs and upgrading their answers. So again, it's one of these things, isn't it? Depending on the lens you take, gives you a different answer.
Absolutely, but I think for us, kind of all roads point not to deter or to detect, but to redesign, and to kind of accept that AI is here and it's here to stay. And actually, there's lots of benefits for the use of AI by TA teams, but to acknowledge and understand that the AI-enabled candidate is here, and then to think about, well, what does that mean for the design of our process? And actually, there's lots of opportunities and tools out there that can help help that to be a positive thing, and not necessarily to see it. Yes, it might have come from a place of solving a problem, but actually, there's opportunity there to redesign, to rethink, and bring and bring your recruitment process, into the here and now.
Yeah. And I guess you'll I'm sure you'll have some examples there of, so for all the things you said at the beginning, the CV's shown historically to not be a great predictor, and now it's become far less useful than it ever was. Certainly looking at our own data from TribePad, I know that CVs are still used in a very large majority of job processes. So how do you think we persuade organizations away from the CV towards redesigning their process?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. I describe the CV as a comfort blanket, and and I think it's difficult. It's been around since Leonardo da Vinci invented it, and
is that right?
Yeah, and that wasn't yesterday. So it's understandable that it can be a hard thing to move away from. But I actually think that the emergence of ChatGPT is probably, well, I know is going to speed up, I think, that the demise of the CV.
Yeah.
And I guess this in a way also links to the other big trend of recent months, which is the kind of the skills-based hiring conversation and debate. And I think that the two things, they're not unconnected.
Yeah.
And I think that the way that we tend to work with our customers and with companies who are feeling that pain of the sea of sameness, but also feeling other pain points that the CV kind of enhances or consolidates, and that might be companies that are facing skills shortages. So if you are solely relying on past experience and current skills that a candidate's got, you're not going to be able to open up your talent pools. And so actually it's a restrictor on talent pools. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing, over this year has been working with companies who are feeling that skills shortage and the impact that has on, diversity. It doesn't help to improve diversity.
Yeah.
They've got roles that have been open for hundreds of days, and they've kind of gone, well, what we've got to lose, we need to try and do something differently. And so they've stepped away from the CV and instead designed a process and used our task-based assessment to measure and identify people that might not have the experience or the CV or the skills, but have got the potential to succeed in a role. And by potential, what we're talking about is, a combination of the kind of the learning agility, but also the right sort of behaviours.
Yeah.
And then blending that and then looking at the candidate's motivation and finding people who not only would never have got through a CV sift, but would probably never have even applied for a job if the advert had talked about, you need to have this experience, you need to have that experience.
Yeah.
But instead going out to market and saying, we're not interested in where you've come from, we're interested in the potential that you've got to succeed in this role.
Yeah.
And
yeah, no, sorry, please continue.
No, I was just going to say, I think that back to your question about how do you encourage organisations to move away from the CV? Well, I guess the CV has to be causing them a visible pain and a problem. And once they've identified that, it's much easier to do it. But my other piece of advice would be, we tend to do this kind of in a pilot way. So we don't go into companies and say, let's do an entire change management, let's completely scrap the CV across the entire organisation. We'll look for those roles, and often actually it's the senior hiring managers who are saying, I can't fill this role, or I'm not meeting my diversity goals, or I've got a team full of people who are really good individual contributors, but I don't have the talent in that team to lead that team because we've only brought people into the organisation based on their technical skills. We haven't recruited looking more holistically. So we tend to kind of do a pilot and redesign the process, starting with the job description, but then, that then sort of forms the job advert, using a task-based assessment so that candidates can show the company what they're capable of and not just tell them by writing a CV or taking a traditional question-based assessment. And then we have the kind of the story of the success of that pilot, and then we kind of build it out and take it into more and more roles. So
start small. Start small, build it out. It's interesting. That sort of follows a pattern that we've seen in organizations, particularly in the public sector, but not always there, using an anonymous applications process where it generally will start from a DEI goal. And we've seen sort of the use of anonymous applications double year on year over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. It's still fewer than 5% of jobs that go through TribePad use an anonymous applications process. And again, I think a lot of that reason is resistance from hiring managers. So it's interesting that my experience is recruitment teams, they'll quite often say, look, we're swamped, we haven't got enough resource, and sometimes the business doesn't listen. It's just like, look, just get on with it. You're an overhead. You need to do what you do. And I think it's interesting what you're saying about, the hiring managers need to feel the pain. They need to understand the problem in order for the business to get on board and solve this and look to innovate and look to redesign the process.
Definitely. And we did some work with Siemens in this exact area. We've been working with them for a long time in their early careers work, and one of their managing directors of one of their businesses, a guy called John Turner, had a role that had been open for hundreds of days, and in conversation with him, I think he was a little bit skeptical, to be honest with you, about scrapping the CV and adopting sort of a hiring for potential approach. But he was so desperate to fill the role. His words were, well, let's try it. What have I got to lose? And he ended up with a short list of 8 candidates who, he phoned us up and said, we've got a problem. And we thought, oh no, this isn't good. He said, problem is I could hire all 8 of them.
Right.
We've got a fantastic shortlist. And they had people, from Aldi, from Kentucky Fried Chicken, from Talk, and said they would just never have made it through a CV sift.
Yeah.
And hiring, in fact, they ended up hiring 2 of them, and the two candidates, and they've gone on to do great things. And now within John's business unit at Siemens, he has other hiring managers coming and saying, we want to do the Arctic Shores thing with you. We've got this problem. And so building that, starting small, getting that success, showing what can be achieved is really the best way to go about it.
You mentioned sort of a debate about skills-based hiring earlier. Is that I've seen some sort of criticism about big taxonomy of lists of skills. I'm aware of one of our customers had done this big survey of trying to align skills. They'd asked their employees, and people had come back with things like, I'm a Jedi master, and they just ended up with this list of like 50,000 skills, and this whole thing sort of became a bit unmanageable. What's your take on skills versus potential, and what organizations should be thinking about there?
No, it's interesting to hear you share that story, Neil, because it's one that I've heard as well, because there is undoubtedly a real buzz at the moment around skills-based hiring.
And at that point, where's it gone? Here we go. Some more research from Arctic Shores, the Pragmatist's Guide to Skills. But why pragmatists, by the way?
Well, I think that gets to the heart of your point and your story and the question that you posed to me. So we had, obviously been hearing the same stories of you and see massively passionate about the potential of companies moving away from the CV, moving away from experience and taking a different approach. And it sounds like it on the face of it that skills-based hiring, might be that thing. So really, really excited to hear that lots of more companies were taking it up. We'd read interesting stats, like I think Indeed Jobs Board had said that the number of adverts that were asking for experience had reduced by 20% over 18 months. There was really something out there and something happening. But in our conversations, we were hearing exactly the same thing as you've described, which is people were up for it, they wanted to try it. And so they set out by going, well, if we're going to do skills-based hiring, what we need to do is map the skills that are needed in the organization, look at the skills that we currently have in our workforce, and then identify the gap, and then just go out and hire to fill that gap. And there was quite a lot of vendors who with products out there that were absolutely all about, going out and mapping skills and finding skills.
Yeah.
But the problem that companies were getting into are exactly what you've described. They'd spend months and months and months and a lot of time and resource and money and effort doing that mapping of what are the skills that we need. And coming back, not just with thousands and thousands of different skills, but no commonality about a definition of what that skill actually meant. So, if you think about, well, what does communication skill mean to an engineer? It might be very different to a chief marketing officer.
Yeah.
And so companies were going out getting involved in skills-based hiring and just getting themselves completely bogged down and losing the hearts and minds of the organization.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to think about skills-based hiring, and I suppose think about the problem that companies were trying to solve and why they were interested in skills-based hiring, but helping them to get rid of this complex, expensive, convoluted approach to it. And thinking about where does it link in with our passion for, thinking about a candidate's potential. And so where we've got to, and we set out this in detail in the Pragmatist Guide for Skills-Based Hiring, which you can download from the Arctic Shores website without having to give away your email address or any details. And what we set out in there is a methodology and a way of thinking about, not thinking about hard skills or soft skills, which are typically what organizations think about when they're thinking about skills-based hiring. But what we talk about actually is what we call skill enablers.
Okay.
So assessing not the hard skills or the soft skills that somebody has got right at this moment in time, but assessing them and looking at them in terms of their ability to adapt, their ability to learn new skills, their ability, how they interact with other people, how they self-manage. And that fundamentally is what the Arctic Shores assessment can measure. And this is, helpful, not just through the lens of finding a more pragmatic way to kind of move away from experience towards potential and thinking about a candidate's sort of future, not their past. But it's also really helpful, back to our earlier topic of AI, because the impact of AI isn't just on recruitment processes and how many CVs people are getting, and not just about candidates' use of AI. AI is hugely important for companies and organizations and talent acquisition teams, because it's changing what we need to what we need the contribution of humans in the workplace to be. So and therefore what we should be thinking about and what we should be assessing when we're recruiting. So there's been a huge amount of research on this from organizations much bigger and more more powerful and with bigger research pockets. Arctic Shores. So McKinsey, for example, have done a huge amount of research and thinking on what are the human skills of the future. And one of the things that they've concluded is that there's going to be an almost kind of a 25% increase in demand for sort of social and emotional skills.
Okay.
The World Economic Forum, in their Skills for the Future report, was saying that sort of about 45% of core skills are going to change between now and 2023. And then Boston Consulting Group had an almost terrifying piece of research, which was saying that the average shelf life of a hard skill is now just 2.5 years. And all of these changes are around automation, AI, digitization, and the pace of change, and what that means for what humans will be doing in the workplace. So, and I guess what that means for companies is what they should be moving to when they're thinking about what they should be hiring for is not just the hard skills that somebody's got at the moment, but what are their kind of the skill enablers, the things that are going to enable them to learn, to adapt, to change, because those are the things that will really tell you about whether a candidate is going to make a contribution and sort of there for the journey.
So how do we test for these skill enablers? What would I be looking for?
So the way that we do that Arctic Shores is through our task-based assessment. So we have sort of 3 skill enabler, what we call the skill enabler families, which are around somebody's thinking style. So how do they solve problems? What's their critical thinking like? We also then measure how they interact with others. So, what's their emotion perception like? How might they perform in a team? How do they pick up on things in a kind of a group environment?
Yeah.
And then the third aspect of the skill enabler family is what we call self-management. So what's their own, what's their focus like? What's, how do they, what's their persistence? What's their determination? And all of those things then that we measure through our task-based assessment, which I should add can't be completed by ChatGPT because it's not language-based, it's interactive, so it's ChatGPT proof. That's then measuring things that, that are typically found in a company's competency framework, or the sorts of workplace behaviors that you might, that might sit behind a job description. So things like, analyzing, handling tasks, decision-making, emotional control, acquiring knowledge, critical thinking, and they all kind of lead up to these skill enablers. And we have up to sort of 15,000 different configurations of the assessment, but it's all linked really closely and set up specific to that particular role. So we're really moving away from what skills, hard or soft, does a candidate have right now. It's around what is their potential to acquire those future skills.
Okay, really fascinating stuff. The Boston consulting thing with hard skills lasting 2.5 years. I'm not sure about that, but interesting. I'd like to know more about that for sure. So if
I'll send you.
Yeah, thanks. So actually, we'll share the link when we share this episode as well. So that'll be really useful. So I guess to wrap up then, if I was working in a TA team right now or leading a TA team, and I'm swamped by the sea of sameness, how would I go about convincing the business? What do I need to do? Is it start with the hiring managers and the skills that are needed? How do I start this pilot and make it a success?
Yeah, well, I think that you need my first piece of advice would be to do a bit of an audit of your process, and to really identify how vulnerable is it to candidate use of ChatGPT. And again, in the playbook that you've shared now, you'll see we've included some advice on that, and also kind of a matrix of what methods and moments within the recruitment process are more vulnerable and which are less vulnerable. So I think I would start by looking at your process, identifying where the problems might be or where the opportunities are to move away from traditional tools like CVs, application letters, covering letters, traditional question-based psychometric assessments.
Yeah.
And I think to do that as a first step, because I think when you go out to the conversation with the hiring managers, you probably need to have a solution in mind. So take a look at that. Speak to some of the vendors and organizations that are already working with organizations to solve the problem, whether that's the problem of the sea of sameness or whether that's the ambition to look at skills-based hiring, but in a pragmatic way. And then I think, start with a pilot and start with your job description. Everything has to stem from the job description. Look at that and think about how you can make that less focused on experience and past behaviors and more articulating what success looks like in the role, what sorts of behaviors, what does the role involve. And we have in the playbook a sort of a 6-step guide that starts with the job description and then takes it from there. And then find that one hiring manager either who's feeling the pain, or maybe who's really passionate about diversity or social mobility, or who's ambitious or up for doing something different, and kind of partner with them, take them on that process, and then run a pilot. You then have some evidence and data and proof points, and build the story and start telling the story about this one campaign where you did things a bit differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Stories are always the most, stories with some data are always the things that get people on board, aren't they?
Absolutely. And I think, if it is more around, you've got that deluge of applications, whether that's in early careers or high volume roles or any role, actually it is about making sure that you've got a sifting process at the top of your funnel that is ChatGPT proof. So that, is going to mean that it's interactive, it's engaging, and it's not language based, and take it from there. But yes, certainly, an era where there's huge change that's being driven by not just candidate use of AI, but AI and the use of AI in the workplace on the up and up. So lots of rethinking.
Exciting times. Estelle, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your knowledge, your wisdom, and your ideas. I'm sure people find that really useful. Thanks so much for chatting with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
My thanks to Estelle McCartney from Artic Shores for sharing some really interesting stuff about this massive era of change we're all facing in recruitment. Do visit tribepad.com/theview to get notifications for future episodes. And please tell a friend. See you next time.